from 8:11 p.m. to 8:48 p.m. on the evening of April 23, 2026. Storm chaser Daniel Shaw tracked a tornado near Enid, Oklahoma. He'd seen it grow. He'd watched it tear through a residential neighborhood. And then he watched it do something that stopped him mid-sentence on his live stream. The tornado turned around. Not weakened, not dissipated. It turned around, crossed its own path, and went back through the same ground it had already destroyed. That is the moment this storm became something different. A tornado that loops back across its own track is violent, but it is also unpredictable, in a way that makes every warning, every evacuation plan, nearly useless. And what made this harder to process was the forecast from earlier that same day. The Storm Prediction Center had placed Loveland's chance of seeing a tornado at 2%, for the storm that would become the strongest twister recorded anywhere in the United States in 2026. April 23, 2026 started as an ordinary spring evening in northern Oklahoma. Enid is a city of 50,000 people, settled into the flat, open terrain of Garfield County. Tornadoes aren't unusual here. The region sits inside the heart of a collision zone where warm, humid air from the Gulf of Mexico meets cold, dry air pushing south from the northern plains. But on this particular evening, the conditions weren't alarming. The Storm Prediction Center's outlook placed the area in an enhanced risk zone. Residents went about their evenings. Forecasters at the local weather office monitored developing cells to the southwest, ordinary enough in April to draw little immediate attention. At the time, the storm's internal rotation was tightening fast, but it remained hidden. The atmosphere carried a quiet charge, the kind that doesn't announce itself until it's already too late to do much more than run. At 8:11 p.m. CDT, the tornado touched down southwest of Enid. It started weak, a thin rope of cloud, barely visible against the darkening sky, making contact with the Oklahoma flatlands without fanfare. Weak tornadoes form and die across the plains all the time in spring, and this one gave no immediate sign of becoming anything more than a brief event on the evening storm log. But within the first 4 minutes, the rotation accelerated sharply. The funnel widened. Wind speeds climbed past what most severe thunderstorms ever generate. By the time Clay Bowden, standing at his workplace on Vance Air Force Base, aimed his camera toward the southern horizon, he captured a stovepipe rather than a rope funnel. A dense, wide column of rotating air grinding across the Oklahoma plains, directly striking the southern perimeter of the military base. If this is the kind of story that makes you stop scrolling, subscribing to this channel means, you'll never miss when something like this happens again. The tornado reached the runway of Vance Air Force Base at 8:11 p.m. CDT, marking the exact moment of its touchdown. Vance operates as a U.S. Air Force training installation, the kind of base that doesn't close for weather without serious reason. That evening, it shut down. Aircraft were evacuated. Personnel took shelter. The tornado swept directly across the runway, a strip of reinforced concrete built to handle military jets, now in the path of a storm whose winds hadn't yet peaked. That crossing also marked a shift in the storm's character. The funnel, already wide and powerful, continued northeast, dragging its base across the ground with a slow, deliberate weight. At 600 yards across at its widest point, it was not threading through gaps in the terrain. It consumed whatever sat in front of it, and Enid's southern edge sat directly ahead. During its path, the tornado moved into the Grayridge neighborhood in southern Enid. 6 homes were destroyed outright, not heavily damaged. Gone. Dozens more suffered major structural failures, with roofs pulled off. Walls collapsed inward, and debris scattered across multiple city blocks. Residents who had taken shelter in basements and interior rooms listened to the pressure change, the freight train roar, and then silence. Emergency dispatchers began receiving calls faster than they could log them. Fire and rescue teams mobilized across the city. But with the storm still active and visibility near zero, access to the hardest-hit zones remained impossible. The Grayridge damage would later be confirmed as part of a continuous track stretching 9.51 miles, a path length that put this tornado among the more destructive single storm tracks recorded in Oklahoma's recent history, and the storm was still moving. Around 8:30 p.m. CDT, during an event that lasted from 8:11 p.m. to 8:48 p.m., the tornado executed a loop, a rare occurrence for forecasters and storm chasers who work these events for decades. Moving west of South 30th Street, the funnel shifted direction and physically crossed its own previous ground track, hitting the same corridor of land a second time in under 10 minutes. Daniel Shaw captured this live, his narration recording the moment with flat disbelief. A tornado is expected to move in a roughly consistent forward direction. It can wobble, it can briefly stall. But executing a physical loop, doubling back across ground it had already stripped, is a deviation that researchers spend years analyzing. Shaw's footage showed the funnel bending its track in real time, and the implications for the neighborhoods it had already passed over were immediate. If this is landing differently than you expected, a like genuinely helps the algorithm. Show this story to more people who need to see it. The loop brought a second pass to the people west of South 30th Street, who thought the storm had already moved on. The same force that had leveled 6 homes in Grayridge returned without warning to the same corridor. Residents who emerged too early from shelter, believing the worst had passed, were exposed to the second hit. 10 people sustained injuries across the full event. Measured against 40 homes damaged or destroyed and winds reaching up to 180 miles per hour. That number reflects a combination of the city's shelter infrastructure and a series of individual decisions made in very short windows of time. 0 fatalities in a storm of this intensity, covering 10.37 miles of populated ground in a city of 50,000 people. Recovery workers would later describe that outcome with a kind of subdued disbelief that doesn't fit neatly into any official report. The physical evidence left behind told the story more clearly than any wind speed reading could. On South 30th Street, one property owner emerged from his basement on the morning of April 24th and surveyed what remained of his yard and street. He looked at the wreckage and said only, "What a mess." 3 words for something that would take months to fully understand. Nearby, workers and neighbors discovered a pickup truck bed sitting at the top of a tree. Not the truck, not the cab. Just the bed, lifted and deposited in the branches. The rest of the vehicle was nowhere visible. Recovery teams searched for wrecks before the full scale of the storm's reach became clear. A heavy recreational vehicle was carried 310 yards from where it sat, with its chassis discovered by ground surveyors in the days immediately following the storm. The storm's winds peaked at 180 miles per hour. That figure placed the Enid tornado at EF4 intensity on the enhanced Fujita scale, 1 rating below the maximum, and confirmed it as the strongest tornado recorded in the United States in 2026. Damage surveyors began assessing the track on April 24th, examining various points along the path to eventually assign the rating. At peak intensity, the funnel had reached 600 yards across, wide enough to span 2 city blocks with room to spare, spinning fast enough to strip mature trees completely bare. National Weather Service investigators found sections of the path where trees were knocked down and stripped of their branches and bark, leaving heavily damaged trunks in the hardest hit areas. That specific pattern of stripping, that degree of removal, pointed directly toward the sustained wind speeds at the storm's core. The tornado began losing structure shortly after completing its loop. The same atmospheric conditions that had fueled its rapid intensification earlier in the evening began to break down. The funnel narrowed, lifted intermittently, and finally lost contact with the ground. The entire event, from first touchdown at 8:11 p.m. to final dissipation, lasted 37 minutes, start to finish. An area of southern Enid that had been a residential neighborhood with standing houses, parked vehicles, and intact trees at 8:10 p.m. looked, by 8:50 p.m., like a region that had been struck from directly above. 30 minutes was all it required to transform 10.37 miles of northern Oklahoma. On the morning of April 24th, Mayor David Mason stood at the center of the recovery operation. His city needed immediate coordination. Volunteers, emergency management teams, and city workers descended on the affected areas and cleared 700 acres of debris in a single day. This total becomes clear once you picture what 700 acres of storm wreckage looks like. Shattered lumber, torn insulation, broken glass, tree limbs, personal belongings, and pieces of vehicles spread across miles of neighborhood streets. Mason's coordination moved faster than most post-tornado recovery operations at this scale. And by the morning of April 24th, formal damage assessments had already begun before major debris clearing could take place. 40 homes confirmed, damaged, or destroyed. 10 injuries. 0 deaths. And one question remained for the researchers who arrived to study the site. Scientists from the National Severe Storms Laboratory traveled to the Enid site on April 24, 2026, specifically to study the damage patterns left by the storm's loop. The trees stripped to bare poles, the path that crossed itself, the RV that traveled 310 yards and was discovered and analyzed just days later. The NSSL team documented these anomalies because they are edge cases in tornado behavior, events that push against the boundaries of existing models built to predict and classify storm activity. When a tornado lops back across its own track, it creates a damage intersection where 2 passes of violent wind hit the same piece of ground. The patterns left in the soil, the structures, and the remaining vegetation carry information that single-pass analysis tools weren't designed to read. The 2% forecast sat in the background of all of it. The Storm Prediction Center's enhanced risk classification for April 23rd wasn't reckless. Forecasting at that range, 24 hours out, deals in probabilities across large geographic areas, not precise point predictions for a specific city. But that number captures something about this night that stays with anyone who followed the event closely. The strongest tornado of 2026 was part of a severe weather setup that forecasters had been watching closely that morning. It crossed a military base runway. It looped back across its own path. It threw a recreational vehicle 310 yards into a field where it was discovered days later. And it did all of this inside a city of 50,000 people with a forecast that pointed toward a quiet evening. That gap between what the models showed and what happened is exactly why the Enid storm will be studied long after the rebuilt homes look like nothing occurred. Not because it killed anyone, because it didn't, but because it behaved in a way that current predictive tools struggle to account for. And because the combination of a looping track, extreme wind speeds, and a low probability forecast is exactly the kind of convergence that storm science needs to understand better. Every striped tree, every piece of displaced debris, every data point the NSSL team collected along that 9.51-mile path adds to an ongoing effort to close the gap between forecast and reality before the next storm like this arrives. If this story stayed with you, like and subscribe. There's more here that doesn't make the headlines, and this channel covers all of it. Oklahoma has a long history with violent weather. Tornadoes are a seasonal reality across the plains, accepted as part of life by the people who choose to build here. But April 23rd, 2026 added something new to that record. A storm that started as a weak funnel and gradually intensified to EF4 strength over its track. A column of rotating air that crossed an active military runway. A neighborhood hit twice by the same storm, within the same half hour. And a city that, by every statistical measure, survived a 180-mile-per-hour tornado, with its people largely intact and its researchers still asking questions about what the damage patterns mean. That's what the strongest tornado of 2026 left behind. Along with debris, it left key questions. While this specific scenario is a fictional depiction of storm behavior, researchers in the real world continually study actual looping tornadoes to better understand these rare events.